The crowd was startled into silence by what he said next. Instead of the smooth crooner, there was a broken man who was numbing his excruciating suffering with booze. That was the saddest moment on television. In a two-room apartment above a shoemaker's business in Steubenville, Ohio, Dino Paul Crocetti was born on June 7, 1917. His parents, Gaetano and Angela, were immigrants from Italy who were struggling to make ends meet. Angela cleaned floors and took in laundry to prevent it from being thrown out, while Gaetano worked 12-hour days as a barber for a meager $18 per week. The water inside wasn't running. In the backyard, they shared a restroom with 3 other families. They only ate bread, pasta, and whatever veggies they could cultivate. Dino didn't start speaking English until he was 5 years old. Students at Grant Elementary made fun of his accent. He needed his older brother to accompany him to class in order to translate. Dino felt alienated even at that time. At 13, he was no longer able to attend school. After completing the 10th grade, he informed his mother that he needed to bring actual money home. He began transporting illegal alcohol across the Ohio River at night for a daily fee of 50 cents. He started collecting bets from steel mill workers who gambled their entire paychecks when he was 14 years old, running numbers for local bookies. He pumped gas, delivered newspapers, stocked shelves, and shined shoes at the country club before dawn. He was 15 when he lied about his age to get $125 per hour working night shifts at the steel factory. Every work was a matter of survival. The task was challenging. It was a poor salary. The weariness was profound. He later claimed that because he had already experienced life the hard way, easy does had become his way of life. He began to fight, too. At the age of 15, he entered underground boxing clubs around the Ohio Valley under the alias Kid Crochet. In 36 fights between 1932 and 1936, he won 25 and lost 11. His nose was broken by one blow, leaving it permanently crooked. He battled without hand wraps since he couldn't afford them. His knuckles broke and never fully recovered. In one battle, his lip was torn open by a hook. The scar never went away. He even lost sensation in some areas of his mouth, giving him the half-smile that would later be described as endearing. A cruel match at Steubenville Memorial Auditorium in 1936 saw 19-year-old Dino take a rabbit punch to the temple and fall face first. He joked about his record, stating, "I won all but 11, but every fight left something broken." He ceased to breathe. His return took 5 minutes. He was vomiting blood and had forgotten his own identity when he woke up. He was hospitalized for 3 days due to a severe concussion, and the doctor told him that he might die if he were struck in the head again. The $470 hospital charge was beyond his family's means. For him, that was all. No more fighting. After that day, he concentrated on singing. By 1934, he was only 17 years old and performing in the backrooms of seedy clubs in Steubenville while selling blackjack. He was well liked by the audiences. From the Mills brothers, he imitated Harry Mills and received tips. Then there was an actual gig. Bandleader Ernie McKay hired him in 1935 for $75 a week, which was a substantial amount during the Great Depression. Wherever they would let him, he sang, including the Walker House and the Rex Cigar Shop. He maintained a relaxed and easygoing look. It was the antithesis of all he had experienced, and it was effective. He also worked at a job that nobody really discussed. When he was 17, he was employed as a croupier at the Rex Cigar Store, which was actually a cover for an illegal gambling establishment. The Scola crime family operated it. He began working on the roulette wheel about 8 p.m. until 4 a.m., making $30 a week plus tips, which was 3 times his mill earnings. When gamblers lost, he would sing to soothe them. He remained calm as the mafia guys became irate. There were 2 raids by federal agents. Both times, he escaped through the back alley. He would perform with dance bands as Dino Martini on slow nights. The combination of danger and charm remained with him forever. Living in a filthy New York apartment with fellow singer Sonny King in 1938, broke, the two of them had a crazy idea. They charged 50 cents apiece for bare-knuckle boxing contests that took place in their living room. They fought until one of them fell, and people crowded in to watch. Dino made $12 the first time, and Sonny was completely knocked out. 3 or 4 times a week they continued until the walls were covered in blood and the landlord evicted them. They were famished. They had to act quickly. In whatever manner they could, they were surviving. A major change occurred in 1940. He was promised $200 a week to tour by Sammy Watkins, the leader of the Cleveland band. However, a catch existed. They altered the name because Watkins felt it was too ethnic. He became Dean Martin on that day. It was called American. Doors were opened. Dean went on a Midwest ballroom tour from 1940 to 1943. People recognized his name because his technique was effortless and his voice was soft. In Cleveland, he wed Betty McDonald in 1941. 4 kids were born to them. Diana in 1948, Gail in 1945, Craig in 1942, and Claudia in 1944. However, Dean continued to tour while Betty remained at home. He was not present for holidays, first steps, or birthdays. The distance was too much for the marriage. Just before Dean's world fell apart, they got divorced in 1949. In 1942, his past nearly destroyed him. He and a number of dealers and entertainers were taken into custody by police when they stormed a gambling establishment in Cleveland. He was being charged with major crimes. The case, however, was quietly dropped a few days later. His former bootlegging contacts reportedly helped. Dean made the arrest public. He leaned in. He created a sense of mystery with it. The Jr with a controversial past. The slick person who grinned after seeing the negative aspects. After being enlisted into the Army in 1943, he served for just 14 months before being medically released due to a hernia. Everything altered with that turn of events. While other men left for the war, Dean remained and rose to fame. He began charging $500 a night to perform in New York's Rio Bamba Room. In 1944, he was given songs by Dean Martin on Wayo, his own radio program. Additionally, he was given a recording contract by Diamond Records in 1946. The songs didn't become successes, but his voice was heard by thousands, which paved the way for the event that would forever alter comedy. At Atlantic City's 500 Club, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis shared the stage on July 25, 1946. The schedule featured a gap due to a canceled act. Dean earned $150 per week. Jerry in a similar vein. Their decision was to improvise. Dean performed. Jerry drew faces. The crowd went crazy. In a matter of days, they were making $1,000 every week. It was $5,000 at the Copacabana by September. They received calls from NBC and Hollywood, and Paramount offered them $50,000 for each movie. When My Friend Irma debuted in theaters in 1949, it brought about $3 million. The whole film was stolen by them, even though they weren't the main characters. The 16 pictures that Martin and Lewis produced between 1949 and 1956 brought in more than $50 million for Paramount. Every release was successful. They sold out their live performances. 4,000 admirers were waiting to enter the Paramount Theater in New York. Dean was a comedian. In 1953, he performed That's Amore in the Caddy, which spent 10 weeks at number 2 on the Billboard charts. 2 million copies were sold. His first gold record came at age 36. It became his hallmark song. However, a crack appeared. Jerry's size, volume, and control increased. Dean began to feel like an outsider. They were each making over $1 million annually by 1952. Despite earning $40,000 every episode, the stress increased on their variety show, The Colgate Comedy Hour. Jerry said that Dean was taking attention during one performance in Las Vegas in 1954. Dean laughed. Jerry took hold of his shoulder before striking him in the mouth. Stitches were necessary for Dean. They continued to perform the following evening. But it was over by 1956. On July 24, they announced their separation to the world. Their most recent movie, Hollywood or Bust, brought in $3 million. After then, they vanished. The group that had dominated humor for 10 years disappeared in a single, subdued press release. Most people believed that Dean Martin was done with Jerry Lewis when he left him in 1956. He had served as Jerry's calm straight man for 10 years. Their breakup was nasty, noisy, and well reported. And everyone expected Dean to decline and Jerry to ascend. Dean did not, however, wane. A few months prior to the split, he secretly recorded Memories Are Made of This at Capitol Records. It was wrapped in a slick charm that only Dean could provide, and featured backing vocals from the Easy Riders. The song peaked at number 1 in January 1955 and remained there for 5 weeks in a row. More than 3 million copies had been sold before the year's end. With the $100,000 in royalties from that one song, Dean was able to purchase his independence and demonstrate that he didn't require comedy to be successful. He continued construction. Sway proved in 1954 that he could include a Latin beat with his languid draw and still get it into the top 10. In 1955, Inamorata followed, peaking at number 8. Neither Crosby nor Sinatra were crunching or belting like him. He was working on a gentler project. The deal was clinched by his album Dream with Dean in 1957. Over 500,000 copies were sold. The delivery was fluid, the tempo calm, and the arrangements gentle. He was drinking the songs, not just singing them. His trademark became that easygoing sound. There was no note fighting going on. He was making it seem simple. Additionally, folks leaned in to listen to every word in lounges, Vegas, and supper clubs from New York to Chicago. Then, in 1962, Frank Sinatra extended an offer to him, giving him a seat at the table. Dean was invited to join Reprise Records, which Sinatra had just founded. Dean's debut album there featured a lot of fun renditions of songs like Sebin in a French flair. Reprise allowed Dean complete discretion over who arranged it, what he recorded, and how it sounded. By 1965, he had 20 top 40 songs and more than 40 albums. Over 5 years, he signed a $1 million contract with Reprise. The freedom was more significant than the money. Sinatra didn't rely on him. He had his own independence. Dean earned $10,000 per week in 1957 while he was the star of the Copacabana in New York. More than Sinatra, that is. It was more than most people. He still had to sing That's Amore every night, though. Everyone knew him from the song. Incorporating it paid him up to $50,000 per show. He detested it, though. He didn't like the phony Italian lyrics. It made him look like a cartoon, which he detested. It was a joke, he said. That song paid for everything, though, so he sang it more than 1,000 times. For the homes, the golf, and the life where he could pick the tunes he truly enjoyed. Dean attempted something unimaginable in August 1964, at the height of Beatlemania. Everybody Has a Romantic Partner. Knocked off the number 1 spot after a difficult day. It was only for a week that he held it, but that week was crucial. For the previous 5 weeks, the Beatles had been at the top of the charts. No one anticipated it. More than 1 million copies of the song, which Dean recorded with the Ken Lane Trio, were sold. His first gold record came from it. They just took a coffee break, Dean replied with a chuckle when asked how it felt to beat the Beatles. However, the cool couldn't conceal all. It was the IRS that knocked in 1958. Dean had concealed roughly $250,000 in Swiss accounts and international royalties. He was charged with back taxes and penalties in addition to a $100,000 punishment. Dean remained calm despite the negative reports. In 1959, he introduced the Dino brand. He was silhouetted on the package. Marketed as quality smokes, they capitalized on the very reputation that led to his troubles. He used the controversy to build a brand. That was only Dean's job. Next came the acting. He was cast by Howard Hawks in Rio Bravo in 1959 as Dude, a broken-down inebriated police officer attempting to crawl out of a bottle. Dean wasn't playing a joke or a singer for the first time. He shot it on scaled-down sets in former Tucson studios. When he bled, shivered, and sweated, critics began to take him seriously. The British Film Institute dubbed it the point at when Dean Martin became human instead of cool. The National Film Registry preserved the movie in 2014 because it was so good. In 1960, Ocean's 11 followed. In Las Vegas, it was filmed at night. Dean did 2 gigs with the Rat Pack during the day. Then they shot after midnight. Nobody got any sleep. They improvised whole sequences. Even one of Dean's nightclub lines was appropriated by Shirley Land for a drunken joke. It felt like a party that was captured on film. The Sands Hotel was where they were creating history. It was known as the Peak. In January 1960, 34,000 people crammed into the Copa room for 3 weeks. Although Dean made it appear simple, Joey Bishop was aware of the reality. As everyone else drank, Dean left early to go home. Golf, not partying, was what he wanted to get up for. He continued the performance in Who Was That Lady? He portrayed a TV writer in a comedy about CIA mix-ups. Dean received a Golden Globe nomination for the movie starring Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis. He portrayed a nightclub singer named Dino who was attempting to bet a housewife and Kiss Me Stupid. The Catholic Legion of Decency vehemently denounced the movie. United Artists chose to release it under a separate label in order to circumvent the criticism. But Dean was unconcerned. He didn't ever say sorry. He continued to work. In 1965, he played Sinatra's best friend in the tumultuous marriage storyline of Marriage on the Rocks. For 20 years, it was their final movie together. At the same time, Dean's personal life was changing. In 1949, his first marriage to Betty McDonald dissolved after 9 years and 4 children. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, he married Jean Beager that same year. Dean Paul Jr., Richie, and Gina were their other 3 children. The 24-year marriage has its share of problems. Despite Dean's public activities, Jean remained faithful. She never got married again after they divorced in 1973. By the middle of the 1960s, Dean was among the wealthiest performers in existence. With Jerry Lewis, they were already making $1 million annually in 1951, which is now more than $123 million. However, Dean's desires went beyond money. Control was what he desired. He started NBC's Dean Martin Show in 1965. For 9 seasons, it ran. It was among the top 10 TV series by 1967. In exchange for a 3-year renewal, NBC gave him $34 million. He could skip rehearsals because of his contract. He simply arrived, made everything work, and smiled. Whiskey was replaced by apple juice. His garbled remarks added to the allure. He was not always intoxicated, despite what many thought. He was behaving. Afterwards, Richie Martin claimed to have used booze as a prop. The show was revived as the Dean Martin Comedy Hour in 1973, and the celebrity roasts were introduced. Bob Hope was the initial one. Sinatra, Jimmy Stewart, and countless more followed. In Las Vegas, at the MGM Grand, they recorded. However, a fire that ripped through the hotel on November 21, 1980, claimed 85 lives. Production ceased for years. The spark was vanished by the time Dean returned to complete his obligation. Dean eventually got back together with Jerry Lewis in that same decade. During the Muscular Dystrophy Marathon, it was Labor Day 1976. Thanks to Frank Sinatra, it happened. More than 85 million people watched. They hadn't spoken in 20 years. Jerry broke down in tears. Dean put on a smile. Behind the scenes. Quietly, they conversed. Jerry said he was sorry. He was forgiven by Dean. Some claim that following then, they spoke every day. They didn't, according to some. Nobody can be certain. But for a single evening, they were once more a team. As Matt Helm, a retired spy, Dean Martin entered the public eye in February 1966. Suddenly, everyone forgot he had ever been a member of a comedic pair. This size was not intended for the silencers. When it came out, it generated $16.3 million and made Dean the hero of his own spy franchise, despite being intended as a lighthearted parody to capitalize on James Bond's success. While saving the world, he was surrounded by women like Stella Stevens and Sid Charisse, and people enjoyed how laid back he was. Additionally, Columbia Pictures didn't wait, which went smoothly. The sequel was released 10 months later. Released in December 1966, Murderers Row was the 11th highest-grossing movie of the year. Dean did not stop. In 1967, The Ambushers came out, and in 1968, The Wrecking Crew, Sharon Tate wowed the audience with what many deemed to be her finest performance to date. She was personally instructed by Bruce Lee. The timing, the strength, the maneuvers. He gave her all of her knowledge. However, Sharon was killed in her house by the Manson family 6 months after the movie's August 9, 1969, release date. Dean broke. It wasn't just a co-star he lost. He lost someone whose life had just begun, with whom he had practiced and smiled. He declined to film the fifth Matt Helm film. The Ravagers were already in the works and had been announced. Dean left. He refused to back down when Columbia Pictures frozen his Murderers Row profit portion as a form of punishment. Matt Helm was gone after that. He returned to a larger role 2 years later. In 1970, Airport was released and quickly gained international acclaim. Constructed with a $10 million budget, it became Universal's biggest hit, surpassing Spartacus with $128 million. The film was nominated for 9 awards, including Best Picture, and Helen Hayes won an Oscar. Dean was far from finished. In the 1971 film Something Big, he played a rash outlaw who kidnaps a woman only to exchange her for a Gatling gun. Filming took place in Durango, Mexico, and it was noisy and rowdy. Additionally, it was the final major film in which Dean would play the lead. He had had enough of pursuing press. The hours, the grind, the pressure. He exchanged it all for TV specials and quick, low-key cameos that paid handsomely and required no effort. On television, Dean found fresh life throughout the 1970s. The Dean Martin Show changed to a weekly roast in 1973, which was looser and funnier. Bob Hope was the first, and it continued for 10 years. Week after week, 54 celebrities were roasted, primarily from the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't heavy. Dean was moving at his own speed. This second wave of stardom was interrupted by an unforeseen event. Immediately following his divorce from Johnny Beager, Dean wed Catherine Horn on April 25, 1973. She was 23 years old. His age was 57. At a hair salon in Beverly Hills, they met via a friend. Originally hosted at Dean's bare residence, the wedding was then relocated to the Beverly Hills Hotel. Her daughter Sasha was adopted by him. Despite efforts to make it work, it barely lasted 3 years. On November 10, 1976, they concluded their peaceful divorce. His private life was never easy. His relationship with his son Dean Paul Martin was strong, and he had 8 children from 3 marriages. The world called him Dino Jr., and he was born on November 17, 1951. He also gained notoriety in 1979 when he starred in the film Players alongside Ali McGra. Even a Golden Globe nomination was made for him. He had other passions outside performing, though. He became a member of the Air Force on November 5, 1980. He gained entry into the California Air National Guard by training as a fighter pilot. Among the greatest, he was calm, sharp, and in charge, according to those who flew with him. Dean was pleased of his son's good character, honesty, and decency more than his fame. However, on March 21, 1987, everything fell apart. Dino took out on a routine flight in an F-4C Phantom jet from March Air Force Base. Quickly, a snowfall arrived. The visibility disappeared. At 19,300 feet, the plane was visible on radar. After a few seconds, it plummeted 4,000 feet and crashed at 400 mph against Mount San Gorgonio. On impact, Dino and his weapons officer, Ramon Ortiz, perished. The search for the wreckage took 6 days. Dean did not get better. That drunken swagger that he displayed on stage had always been nothing more than a glass of apple juice. It was no longer an act, however, after Dino's passing. He began to drink seriously. He stopped performing. He was gone. His heart ached and never recovered. Dean received an invitation from Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. to go on tour with them in March 1988, a year later. Together Again was the name they gave it. For Fortune 5500 fans, it began in Oakland, but Dean was gone after just 1 week. He was unable to. The laughing, the journey, the masses. It had a hollow feeling. He dropped out of the tour. They publicly declared him ill. On the inside, it was sorrow. Liza Minnelli took over as host, and the program was renamed The Ultimate Event. But Dean was no longer there. The drinking continued to worsen. His condition deteriorated. He smoked for 60 years, which caused emphysema. Early in the 1990s, he hardly ever left the house. In 1993, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. The growths were getting bigger. They advised him to have his liver and kidneys operated on. He might be able to buy himself years of time. However, Dean declined. Surgery was not what he wanted. He was against chemotherapy. He had already accepted death. Pals pleaded. "Please," Sinatra said. Dean continued to repeat the same thing, though. "All I'm waiting for is death." It was too late when he gave up smoking that year. Already, his body had surrendered. He remained at home and kept silent. He smiled courteously when visitors came to visit. He didn't, however, fight. Dean Martin passed away from acute respiratory failure in his Beverly Hills residence at 3:30 in the morning on December 25, 1995. His age was 78 years. The lights on the Las Vegas Strip went down in his honor. Sinatra referred to him like a brother. When Jerry Lewis, who had formerly been the person closest to Dean, received the news while on tour, he sobbed. In a private setting, Good Shepherd Catholic Church hosted Dean's funeral. There were about 200 persons present. This is following Dean's passing. "You mentioned that you spoke at Dean's funeral and that you attended his. I lost my partner and best friend, the man who made me the man I am today." Gregory Peck, Tony Bennett, and Jerry Lewis stepped up and told the public what the press had never done correctly after he died away. "I thought Dean was awesome. He was generous. He had strength. He didn't have to prove it either." Stories regarding his true intelligence began to circulate after his passing. Everyone had assumed that Dean Martin simply had a drinking hand and jokes on the side. They later learned about the Las Vegas real estate tycoon, however. In the 1990s, land he had purchased for $150,000 in the 1960s had sold for more than $12 million. The total worth of his estate was $30 million. Originally purchased for $120,000, his mansion in Beverly Hills was eventually valued at around $28 million. Dina, his daughter, broke down in tears upon realizing how meticulously he had constructed everything. Dean had played the long game in a low-key manner. And yes, that apple juice thing was real. It was finally confirmed by Jerry Lewis. For all those years on television, he was perceived as sloshed. Most evenings, though, it was simply juice. To make them laugh and relax, he feigned intoxication. However, the true Dean was always 1 or 2 steps ahead.